Hello and welcome to a solo edition of Found in Interpretation podcast. I'm one of your hosts today, Alain Breton. The reason why I'm doing the podcast alone today is because I wanted to talk about a major policy shift in the United States. President Donald Trump's executive order making English the official language of the United States. Now, for the first time in history, the U.S. has a federally recognized national language. Now, what a milestone, you might think, after all 250 years. Well, this order aims to encourage new Americans to learn English, stating that not only it opens doors economically, but helps newcomers engage in their communities, participate in national traditions, and give back to society, quote unquote. Because, of course, the real issue facing immigrants isn't economic barriers, discrimination, or bureaucracy. It's their failure to instantly master English, right? This order also revoked Executive Order 13166 issued by President Bill Clinton, which mandated federal agencies to provide language assistance to people with limited English proficiency, what we call LEP. The Trump administration's dismantling of this 20-year-old plus executive order removes one of the few federal policies in place to address language access. As a result, 26 million people in the U.S. who are limited English proficient and their families will face greater obstacles in accessing healthcare, education, emergency response, and other areas of public life. But hey, at least government forms will be in one single language, right? Well, as a Canadian, I come from a country where official bilingualism is a foundational principle. Now, Canada has long recognized that language rights are a crucial part of a national identity and civic participation. And this perspective gives me a unique lens through which to analyze this policy shift in the US. Now, while Canada guarantees access to services in both English and French, this executive order in the US actually moves things in the opposite direction and potentially reducing language access rather than expanding it. Maybe that was the objective, but what does it mean for the country, for America? How will it impact translation and interpreting services? Let's take a look. Now, first of all, what is an official language? Well, an official language is one used by the government to conduct official business. More than 30 states in the United States have already designed English as their official language, but this is the first time it's happening at a federal level. Now, while having an official language can unify a nation, it can also raise concerns. The International Institute for Democracy warns that such policies can place certain groups in positions of power while excluding others. But sure, let's assume this is all about efficiency and not about making life harder for millions of people. Well, the White House fact sheet describes this policy as a way to promote unity, establish efficiency in government operation, and create a pathway for civic engagement. Now, let's decode that. Efficiency often translates to budget cuts, meaning fewer government-funded translation and interpreter services. So efficient, right? Promoting unity sounds like a polite way of saying speak English or else. Creating a pathway for civic engagement can be interpreted as an attempt at assimilation rather than inclusion, because nothing fosters civic engagement quite like shutting people out of the conversation. Now, currently, there are 46 million people in the United States who speak English, quote unquote, less than very well, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Now, these individuals rely on language services for healthcare, education, and legal matters. But what happens if the government moves to an English-only model? Spoiler alert, not much good. Now, under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, federal agencies and programs receiving government funding must provide language access for limited English proficient individuals. This has led to widespread translation and interpreting services in healthcare, courts, schools, and public services. As an example, the U.S. Service of Management and Budget once estimated that federal agencies spent $1 to $2 billion annually on language assistance services. Another example, the California court system alone spends over $90 million a year on interpreters. Now imagine the chaos if people didn't understand their own trials. The New York City government translates key public documents into at least 10 languages to serve its multilingual population. Now clearly, accessibility is a luxury, right? Would an official English policy change this? Some argue that it could reduce government spending on multilingual services. Others warn that limiting translation services would create significant barriers for millions of residents who don't yet speak English fluently. But who needs to understand emergency alerts or legal notices anyway? Let's take a look at international comparisons. Canada has two official languages, French and English, and ensuing government services are available in both. This policy benefits official language minorities and promotes inclusion, but requires significant investment, about $2.4 billion annually, according to a study by the Fraser Institute. By contrast, countries with only one official language, like the UK or Australia, still provide extensive interpreting and translation services. The UK's National Health Service, NHS, spends over £114 million per year on interpreter services to assist patients who don't speak English. Australia operates the TIS National, a government-funding interpretation service available 24/7 in over 150 languages. And these examples suggest that even if English becomes the US official language, interpretation services may remain essential. Now, so much for efficiency. But this may actually backfire on the Trump administration, and that'll be good for interpreters. And here's the twist. This policy may actually increase demand for interpreters. Why? Because making English the official language does not magically make people fluent. People will not wake up in one morning speaking perfect English just because of a government order. Millions of people will still struggle with English, and government employees will no longer be able to communicate with them in other languages. This means that agencies will be forced to rely even more on interpreters to avoid legal and civil rights violation. Look at Arizona. After adopting an official English law, courts and government agencies had to hire more interpreters to comply with federal legal requirements. And the same happened in Alabama when driver license exams were restricted to English. Legal challenges forced a reevaluation of language policies. The U.S. federal courts used interpreter over 100,000 times in 100,000 proceedings across 123 different languages in 2022 alone. And with fewer government employees able to bridge the language gap directly, that number is only going to rise. So, interpreters, take heart. This policy may claim to streamline communication, but in reality, it will only make our skills more essential than ever. Now, declaring English the official language of the United States is a significant cultural and political move, and while it may streamline government communication, it is unlikely to eliminate the need for interpreters. In fact, historical and international evidence suggests that restricting language accommodation often increases interpreter demand. Now, as a Canadian, I recognize the value of ensuing language access as part of a nation's fabric. Canada has shown that a bilingual approach does not weaken a country, quite the opposite. It strengthens it by ensuring inclusivity and equal access to government services. As for American interpreters, well, this executive order creates uncertainty. I get it. But here's the silver lining. Language barriers aren't going anywhere. If anything, interpreters will be needed more than ever to bridge the gap this policy creates. And no matter what political changes may occur, we should always advocate for greater language access. Because if government efficiency means making life harder for millions of people, well, perhaps it is not so efficient after all. Thanks for listening. Like, share, and subscribe. Good night and good luck.